I mean, why is that prohibited? You have to be moral to be a good natural scientist?
Yeah.
Okay.
To make sense of that, you could construct an argument such as this, that in order to devote yourself to the kind of study that is required for intellectual virtue, the rest of your house has to be in order. Physically, morally, you have to be surrounded by material comfort. You have to have friends who will support you. You have to have the institutions and resources in place to devote yourself to this knowledge of nature. I mean, of course, it's not an argument by necessity. But the other answer to your question is perhaps an evil person can go about acquiring all these bits of knowledge piecemeal, but won't know it in the systematic way that comes to the person who has access to the active intellect. Because the active intellect is not just a collection of bits of knowledge, but it's that knowledge systematized by more general principles. And so to achieve that systematic insight requires a study of Torah, a study of what he calls the metaphysical secrets of the Torah and the theological secrets of the Torah. And a vicious person wouldn't engage in that study.
Yeah. Does Maimonides have anything to say about the relation of true virtue to behavior that we might call self-sacrificial? In quote 5, for example, we find him saying, if you should happen to pass on your way a widely contested, extended field of battle, but what about, unless we attribute to the truly virtuous a really fantastic quasi-omnipotence about the circumstances of other people about whom they do and should care, it seems possible that the truly virtuous would find themselves, through no fault of their own, in a situation in which people about whom they do and should care are threatened by some sort of conflict or other situation that threatens disaster, which might give them morally good reason or even obligation to do something that carries a substantial risk of loss to themselves. So how does that fit in, or does to Maimonides' theodicy, or does he simply ignore that possibility?
There are times where the pursuit of intellectual virtue is not just an elitist pastime, but extraordinarily egocentric one. That all I care about is achieving my own well-being. At the same time, there are, unless you're Achilles, who can go through a battle slaying all the Trojans without bearing a scratch, it's hard to see how, if the virtuous person has truly achieved not just intellectual virtue, but also moral virtue, why wouldn't that moral virtue inform them in the way in which they would protect others, even at risk of personal harm? I don't know.
Do Maimonides' commentaries on Torah cast any light on that? Would they be compatible with a totally egoistic approach to such matters?
No, where he does discuss ethics, you would think at times you're reading the Nicomachean Ethics, that it's not a withdrawal for self-perfection, but there's courage as a mean between two extremes. And if the virtuous person has already gone through the training of moral virtue, shouldn't that courage inform their behavior towards others, even if their main pursuit now is intellectual virtue? And it may be that what this means is that the harms that the virtuous person will avoid will be harms that, I'm not quite sure how to put this, they will still suffer harms as long as they're harms over which they have some control. So I will willingly take on these harms for the sake of a moral goal.
Okay, there won't be any mere bad luck, but they may still exercise courage in a way that means that their practical wisdom will sometimes be about what risks to run rather than how to avoid all risks.
And given their intellectual virtue, they will know exactly what the risks are. Their calculations will be accurate. So they won't rush headlong into battle if there's a threat of death to them. Well, they'll have to weigh the costs. But they may rush into battle knowing exactly who the enemy is and what harm they will suffer, and weigh that against what it is they're trying to achieve. Yeah, in this case, I would say it's a matter of control over external circumstances.
Okay.
Dennis, there's a hand up behind you. Did you want to do one more? Or?
Sorry. Okay, one last question then.
Well, I have a simple question. Is it one? And then a view from the satellite of this philosophy. My question is, what's the relevance of this philosophy which was developed in the 12th century, to the best of your knowledge, in today's life?
With all due respect, I would think it's evident that we no less than a 12th century rabbi or 9th century Muslim or 14th century Christian, we're all striving to achieve some sort of flourishing and well-being in a world that often holds obstacles to it. And if there's a path towards happiness that's being held out to us, I don't see. Maimonides' path, this sort of two-pronged path, become more knowledgeable about the world so that you can exercise more control over it, and at the same time achieve a sort of stoic attitude towards the things you can't control. That seems as relevant a message now as it was 1,000 years ago.
From your presentation, I got this feeling that it's similar to the philosophy of Solomon in the Old Testament. And to my understanding, there is no life after death in his wisdom. And I didn't hear much about that aspect.
Maimonides minimizes it. In fact, he says that among those who will have no place in the world to come are those who speculate on the world to come. So, but at great risk, I will make a statement or two. And in a way, this goes back to my answer to Don. The emphasis for Maimonides is on well-being and happiness in this very material world we inhabit. He does not think that virtue, the true rewards of virtue. He does think that there are rewards for virtue in the world to come, but that's not why you should pursue virtue.
And my question was, do you see a pattern here, like, although it was in the 12th century, it was after Christianity and after the Muslim developed their teachings? I know those are theologies, but and this is philosophy, and probably
Right.
you
But
don't.
the Guide to the Perplexed is very much a work of Kalam, of Muslim theology.
No, I was just wondering if you notice a pattern, like, because you know, in the last previous century, the dialectical materialist, the philosophy of the communists, they just took Hegel's dialectics, which had the idea as primordial, idea, God, and they just turned it upside down.
Mm-hmm.
They said the matter is primordial, and then they developed this system. Do you see this as sort of the same? Because I see a lot of similarities between the teachings of Christianity, except this God has an infinite intellect, while the gods of Christian has infinite love. And it looks to me like you just go there and say, yeah, I can see that, I understand that. Although I never heard of this philosophy before.
Right. Maimonides had no access to Christian thought. He did
I'm
have.
not talking about that. He did it in the
No.
12th century?
No, he couldn't read. He couldn't read Latin.
Well, I was
Or
just
Greek.
wondering, because to me, this is, I replace God of infinite love with the God of infinite knowledge, type of knowledge, and they are both infinite.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that there is something, but I don't know. looks to me like God of love, an infinite love, and God of infinite, I would say, wisdom, or you said knowledge, cannot be the same.
That might be a good place to stop.
Okay, so now we'll go to lunch. Let's thank the speaker.